The Sabrael Confession, The Heavenly War Chronicles, Book 1, by Stephen Smith. For nearly a month we watched, studied, keeping to the spiritual plane. We remained silent, unseen. The gestures people used, their behavior, their interactions, both public and private. Tirelessly we memorized all mankind's intricacies, training ourselves to think and act human. I was enthralled to be so close to them, awed at how far they'd come from their original state. Souls of the dead walked everywhere in the spiritual plane, yet living had no idea. They were a constant presence, and it was not uncommon for them to beg us for help. Michael and Gabriel took it upon themselves to handle these souls, urging them to follow the path to Sheol. This path, as I saw it many times, periodically opened for each soul, but it was up to the soul to enter. Some went happily, but many feared it and instead continued their desperate attempts to regain their lost mortal coil. Finally, the time for study was over. On a hill outside Jerusalem, in a cluster of olive trees beneath a starry sky, the seven of us greeted and gathered one last time. The time has come, brothers. Today we part and embark on our assignments, Michael said. Though there was excitement in his voice, there was also sadness. I couldn't blame him. I felt the same. The six of us stood before him, and Michael doled out assignments that scattered us across Judea. It was difficult to hear we would be so far apart. Along with the regions we were to guard, each of us received a cover identity, a human part to play to avoid detection. I could not help my laughter when Raphael Malakamot was told he would pose as one of the men who carted waste from the city of Damascus. When my turn came, I hoped for more. Direct human interaction. I braced for the worst, but Michael told me I would become a Greek noble visiting Jerusalem. I could barely contain my excitement. I thanked God for such a blessing. My first contact would be with the Roman praetorian serving as guards in the city after the empire's expansion into Judea. I was simply to tell them my position and seek lodging in the royal palace. According to Michael, everything would then fall into place. Once you are admitted, try to make friends with members of the royal court. Earn their trust, and no news from the city will slip past you. Make sure your performance is flawless. You will be under the harshest scrutiny. Herod is a particularly suspicious king, barely trusting his own family, let alone a stranger in his house. One mistake, and he will order you killed. How will I get a message out if I need to report something? I asked him. Call out in the spiritual plane and I will hear you. He started to move on, but turned back to add, one more thing. When you create your physical form, make sure to include a pouch on your belt. It will prove invaluable. Once Michael spoke to each of us, it was time to separate and go into the world. He traced shapes in the dust with his foot, gathering his thoughts or perhaps delaying our inevitable parting. When he spoke, his voice was more vulnerable than I'd ever heard it before. We all know what we must do. Take care, my brothers. I would not return to this place having suffered the loss of anyone. Remember that the Father will not interfere. There will be no heaven. There will be no backup for us, no aid from heaven. We seven are all that stand between the Son and the fallen. Even after a month, it was still incomprehensible. I could not fathom being totally cut off from our home. Yet here we were. The fallen and their followers are many here. Never forget that wary eyes are upon you. Your guard must never falter, not even among those you trust. And remember that that should you ever need any of us, we are but a call away. Michael stood silent, staring at a cross he'd drawn with his foot in the dirt. He wiped it away. May God keep us all, and may we return victorious once the Son has achieved his goal. We all embraced one another, unsure of what to say. Raphael managed a smile that lightened the moment. Take care, Sabrael. Should you meet any of our fallen brothers, make sure to call me before anyone else. I wouldn't want to miss any fun. Shoveling crap doesn't sound like fun, I teased. Hilarious, really, he said as he hugged me, and with a comforting smirk he was gone, soaring north for Damascus. The others took longer to leave, and I remained, eager to join the humans, but reluctant to leave my brothers. Soon enough, though, they all disappeared into the night, one by one, until I was alone on the hill with Michael. Everyone will return unharmed, right? I asked. Michael turned a solemn gaze to me. I cannot see the future, Sabrael. I know only that which God tells me, and his voice has gone silent. I couldn't imagine what it would be like to lose one of our brothers. I prayed silently for the protection of the Almighty. Thank you for that, Michael said. He embraced me. I must go. The son's earthly parents need protection. Watch your back, my brother. His wings opened and he soared into the night, blotting out the stars as he flew away. My flight was the shortest of all. I sat down outside the walls of Jerusalem only a few minutes later. The excitement of the task ahead was intoxicating. How strange it would be to live among those sprung from, yet so unlike Adam, to be seen and recognized, rather than just meeting the unknowing stares of those who gaze toward heaven. The desire to run into the city and introduce myself to everyone was overpowering. I attempted to collect myself by reviewing the details of my assignment one more time, and to my surprise, found that my counterfeit identity was entirely formed in my mind. Specific aspects of Greek culture came to me as I silently interrogated myself. I could even remember Athens and the home I supposedly once inhabited there. There would be no auditions for this role. Apparently, I was already playing the part. If my ruse was to work, I needed to enter the city from either the north or west. The port city of Jaffa on the Mediterranean coast would be the most likely point of arrival for a traveler from the Aegean. Soaring around the city wall, I reached a gate at the northwestern corner. It was closed, as I was sure all of them would be at that hour. Unfortunately, passing through the walls wasn't an option. They were just as impenetrable in the spiritual plane as the physical. I did not fall through the ground while walking on it. I could not push through stone walls. I could fly over them, of course, but looking to the top of the wall, I spotted Roman soldiers on patrol high above and had an idea. If Herod was going to scrutinize me, as Michael believed, I didn't want to leave any chinks in my story. A record of my arrival would go a long way. Pressing tight against the wall to avoid the guard's view, I called matter to form a physical body. Shadows appeared as my eyes became physical, and the darkness of night blanketed everything. I made sure my appearance befit my role. Athletic build, traces of fading youth in my features, shoulder-length brown hair, a neat beard, and brown eyes. My robe solidified into a purple tunic, mimicking the fashion of Athenian nobles, its hue the mark of the wealthy. And over this a white exime with gold trim snaked down from my left shoulder to circle up under my arm. Hanging from an ornate belt, I formed a pouch, as Michael had suggested. Sandals were wound round my feet, and then for a final touch, I dulled my clothes to appear weathered from the journey. My transformation complete, I stepped from the shadows and readied myself for the inevitable bout of questions once the guards above saw me. One of the guards spotted me immediately and waved his hand to another. To my surprise, the city gate opened a crack. Confused that there was no interrogation or request for identification, I stood motionless, but the guard waved me on. I stepped into the city uncontested, and the gate cranked shut behind me. So it was that I entered the world of humans. The air inside the walls smelled of olives. A cool breeze kicked up sand from the street, showering my legs. I closed my eyes, relishing the wind coursing over my face and arms. I tried taking a breath, wondering if all the air in the world held traces of everyone who'd ever breathed it. Such an odd sensation breathing. I was glad it wasn't a necessity. Torches burned in brackets attached to storefronts and houses, illuminating the nighttime streets. Carts of covered fruits and goods lined the walkway as far as I could see. Though the city was bright, it seemed deserted as I headed up the main road toward the palace. The street was long and the walk arduous, but I cared not. The wind on my skin and the sights of the city were more than enough to keep me in high spirits. I knew I was getting close when I spotted three towers of the most beautiful stone rising from behind the tall wall of the palace grounds. Moonlight reflected off their smooth surfaces in a bluish gleam, the glimmer of gold in their windows. Gazing at them, I felt like I could reach out and touch them despite the distance. What marvels man had created! Were my brothers in the presence of such beauty, I wondered? Or had I been so blessed as to be the sole witness to such majesty? The towers loomed silent and stoic, as though suspicious of the newcomer. Having not seen a single person inside the city yet, I had the eerie sensation of being the only living thing there. Then I saw them. Following the wall to a large market outside the palace's heavily guarded entrance, I froze at the sight of movement. There, milling about in the otherwise empty agora, were about a dozen people, the descendants of Adam and Eve, the children sprung from the flood survivors. These would be the first people I spoke to as a member of their race. My trial had begun. Approaching the group, trembling, I singled out a man whose gaze was directed at a balcony high above the palace wall. Reaching up, I tapped his shoulder. "Excuse me." To my surprise, he whipped around and grabbed my wrist, twisting hard. His shoulders and arms were thick with muscle. How had I not noticed this? I thought I felt bones breaking. "Hands off, thief!" he shouted, his voice deep and husky. Other people turned to look at the commotion. My teeth clenched in pain. I couldn't speak. Then, amazingly, the man's gaze fell on my clothes, and he recoiled, falling to his knees. "Forgive me, Lord," he begged. "It is all right," I said, my wrist aching as though he were still wrenching it. I would have to adjust my body's sensitivity to pain. "Please rise. No need to draw attention." The man remained on his knees. "I humbly accept your punishment." "Punishment? You did nothing wrong. The fault was mine for surprising you." He seemed confused, but cautiously stood. "Tell me, why do you all gather here so late?" He seemed confused by my question. In the early morning, the king sometimes throws money to those who stay in the square all night. You must be joking. Why would a ruler demand that of his subjects? The man looked back toward the balcony and through gritted teeth said, "What better way to ensure a welcoming audience when he wakes?" "You wait here every night?" I asked. I looked around at the others, their torn and dirty clothes, their desperate gazes trained on the same balcony, as though they might miss the golden moment if they were to look elsewhere. "No," the man replied, his voice lowering. "Every other night my wife takes my place." It was unbelievable that a ruler could let his people suffer so. This man was healthy, solid in body and mind, yet he stood in clothes pock-marked with holes. "Forgive me, but if it embarrasses you to be here, why wait for scraps when I am sure you could find work of your own?" He laughed and replied, "Surely you must be a visitor. There is a little work here for one of my standing, but it is no better anywhere else. At least here I might gaze upon beautiful buildings and imagine myself inside them." I was appalled. Would the citizens not give work to their brother in need? Then I remembered the pouch on my belt. Reaching into it, I gathered matter to create gold and silver coins and poured the money into his hand. His eyes lit up. Michael had been correct. The pouch was a good idea. "Please, take this," I said. He looked at me in amazement, then fell to his feet and kissed my hand. "This is more than I have received in a year. How can I repay this kindness?" "I must speak with the king. Can you tell me how I might enter the palace?" Again, confusion when he looked up. "Surely that cannot be all." I smiled and replied, "The Almighty teaches if a man among your brothers is in need, aid him however you can. If money is what you need, I am happy to give it." "Bless you, Lord," the man said. Looking at the palace gate, he nodded. "The gate is open to those of your standing. The guards will part when you approach. You will not find Herod so welcoming, though. He speaks only to his closest advisers. I would seek them out first if you ever hope to reach him." "How will I know them?" He cupped a hand around my wrist. "They wear gold bands here. If you see that, you are looking at a member of Herod's court. Come with me. Perhaps we can find work for you in the palace." The man shook his head. "Crossing that threshold means death for me. The court will suffer no concerns of the poor, but for the wealthy their door is always open." I looked at the decorated gate, the same white stone around it as that used to build those marvelous towers. I could just make out the silhouettes of guards in the shadows. The crests of their helmets were unmistakable. "You are sure they will let me pass?" "I would not lie to you. Your path will not be blocked, I assure you." The line of guards didn't look welcoming. Still, I grasped the man's forearm and said, "Thank you. May the Almighty bless and keep you. Forgive me, Lord, but I must know, from where have you come?" "Greece, Athens, if you know where that is." "I know it so well. Your clothes gave you away," he laughed. Bowing, he said, "My name is Theocritus. I am Athenian as well. Should things not go well for you in there, ask my name in the Weaver district, and I will gladly offer you sanctuary in my home. Thank you again, Theokritos, I said. Theokritos had been correct. I stepped through the outer gate of Herod's palace, and the guards parted for me. How strange that the color of one's clothing could open doors. If I were to change the hue of Theokritos' garb to match my own, would that be all it took to change his fortunes? The difference between the city outside the palace walls and that within was astonishing. The city had been beautiful, but a layer of dust and sand lay just beneath the surface. It was lit up only near the shops, the light of the moon, the sole illumination in many areas. Most of the citizens of the city were asleep. The palace, however, was none of these. A vast courtyard met my eyes as I passed through the gate. Two buildings rose to each side of the courtyard, their Romanesque design unlike anything outside, rows of exquisitely carved columns beneath a roof adorned with statues formed a long colonnade between them. And within this a landscaping miracle formed the innermost square. The desert sand The desert sands had been replaced by rows of fig and olive trees trimmed to perfect form over lush lawn and flower beds. Walkways wound through this vibrant garden, radiating from a central fountain spewing water into the air. By the time I realized I was gawking, I had already wandered to the fountain. The two main buildings, one at each end of the courtyard, were perhaps 3 stories tall, I thought, though it was difficult to tell with so many porticos and balconies. The paved road and the garden walkways converged at a stairway leading into each building. Moonlight poured over everything, but even so, hundreds of torches and lanterns illuminated even the deepest recesses of the walls. The firelight danced on the walkways, the rhythm of the flames hypnotizing. The air no longer smelled of olives here, but rather water and flowers. Quick footsteps preceded a line of young men in white robes, running from one building to the next. It was only as they passed me that I noticed the people working throughout the courtyard, all wearing those same robes. They carried everything from gardening tools to scrolls to plates of food. I was happy to see these servants, as they must have been, looked healthier and cleaner than those outside. I couldn't believe the magnificence of it all. I doubted anywhere else in the city rivaled this beauty. A voice startled me. "Stay where you are." I turned to find myself face to face with a leather breastplate molded to the form of muscles, a cape of scarlet draped from the square shoulders of the palace guard. The man was huge, but I very much doubted his chest looked like the armor did. "State your business here." "I am Aegeus," I replied, the name coming without hesitation, though I'd never known it before that moment. "I have come to worship in the city of King Herod the Great." The guard glanced at my clothing. "You must have traveled far." "Athens, actually. My family recently joined the aristocracy there. This is my first journey to the king's land." You speak Aramaic well for this being your first trip, the guard said. I was astonished. It had not even occurred to me to think about what language I spoke. The guard somehow heard Aramaic, yet I was simply speaking as I always had. By the same token, I understood every word of his. Somehow my words were being translated to match what was spoken to me. I wondered whether Theocritus had heard me speak Aramaic or Greek. I tried to mask my amazement. I studied the language to ensure I would honor the king, I replied. You would do better to study Latin. The guard sized me up, clearly not believing me, but before he could continue, another man stepped from the shadows. The fountain reflected a churning pattern of light and dark on his face, his trim silver beard. My gaze went straight to the gold band on his forearm beneath the purple cape over his shoulder. A member of the court, if Theocritus could be trusted. His sudden appearance unnerved me. I truly had no idea anyone was watching me. That was twice now. It was discouraging to think I could be spied upon so easily. If these men had been the fallen, I might have been dead already. The guard bowed as the man stepped up to us. Is there a problem here, Praetorian? Though he spoke to the guard standing beside him, the man's eyes remained fixed on me. This visitor claims to be of the Athenian aristocracy, Lord, the guard reported. Does he? The man asked without change of expression. And for what purpose has the young aristocrat come to our glorious city? To worship at the temple. View the majesty of his highness's rule, of course, I answered. The temple? There are no bolts of lightning or vestal virgins here, Athenian. I am a Jew, my lord, I answered, as are many in Greece these days. Looking around, the court member's brow furrowed. I see no servants, no train of supplies, no animals, nothing one would surely need to survive such a long journey. Did you come all this way from Athens on your own, I wonder? My train was attacked on the road from Jaffa. My possessions taken and my servants slain. I would have shared their fate, but in the struggle one of my horses kicked free of its captor. When it ran past where I was hiding beneath one of the wagons, I leapt out and pulled myself onto his back. I was able to ride safely away, though I assure you I never felt safe, while sand was yet beneath my feet. A brave gamble, the guard said. I commend you. The court member caught the guard in an icy gaze. The Praetorian cleared his throat and stood straighter. An amazing tale indeed, the nobleman said. Almost wholly unbelievable, I would say. Tell me, where is this magnificent beast that saved your life? It must be quite an animal to survive the desert with a rider all the way from Jaffa. I had to be careful with my reply. Already treading lightly, one misstep would mean disaster. Quite the animal it was, but survive it did not. I have been on foot from sundown yesterday to now, and so you see how I have arrived in your city, with little more than my body and the clothes on my back. I hope to find lodging in the king's company. The man's face remained stoic. I was beginning to wonder if this was going to work. Michael said all I needed to do was talk to the guards and all would be taken care of. Yet, with every passing moment, my confidence waned. The noble continued scrutinizing my face. And once again, I once again wished I had the ability to read minds, as some of my brothers could. If the guard had not been there, I had the feeling this man would have thrown me out of the palace already. Finally, the nobleman sighed and said, "Well, guard, do as you please with him. I am weary and retiring to my chamber." He looked back at me with an awkward smile. "Perhaps we shall meet again, young aristocrat." He bowed his head, though his eyes never left mine. He walked away, disappearing into the pillars of the colonnade. I asked the guard, "Who was that?" "Irenaeus, the king's orator and member of the High Court. Surprising he did not take to you. He is also Greek." "Really?" I asked, watching Irenaeus as he entered the building on the right. Was his animosity so strong because I too claimed to be a wealthy Greek, or was he simply confrontational with all newcomers? I hoped it was the latter. "Come, Corinthus handles accommodations. He may yet be awake." I spent the remainder of that night in the elegant apartment of Corinthus, the palace caretaker. Though he was awake when the guard and I arrived, he couldn't find me lodging until morning. Coincidentally, Corinthus was from Thebes, and we spent most of the night reminiscing about our shared home country over wine. It wasn't difficult to fool him into thinking I was drinking it. He was well into his third bottle before I even arrived. When he was finally too drunk to stay awake, he prepared a bed of pillows for me on the floor and retired to his room. I paced for hours, pondering my situation, until the sun crept over the horizon to flood the earth in golden light, the sky transforming from black to gray to blue. My first surprise. It was not quite midday when Corinthus finally woke and led me to an enormous banquet hall. He had a full beard of black hair. He might have preferred on the top of his head, and while he dressed in noble purple, he lacked the golden armband of the court. He also slept in the guest building across the courtyard from the court's quarters. The servants seemed to treat him with respect, however, and for most of the walk he humored me with jokes about the court members that only an insider would know. Inside the hall, more than a dozen men sat around the long table, laughing and telling stories. At its head, a stout man watched the others as though bored, or perhaps judging them. Jeweled rings and bracelets adorned his arms, a gold band on his head glinting in the sunlight. Herod the Great, King of Jerusalem. If I were to remain a welcome guest in the city, I knew I needed only to earn favor with him. Corinthus moved to an empty chair and motioned me to the one beside him. Servants immediately clamored over us, bringing meats and wine, this in addition to all the fruits and breads already on the table. Too late, I realized I'd never eaten before. Would I know how to chew, to swallow? Was the body I formed for myself even capable of such things? Who in this stranger Who is this stranger that would dine at my table without first presenting himself? Herod asked. The heat of blood rushed into my cheeks as the entire assemblage stared at me. Corinthus nearly leapt out of his chair. Forgive me, Highness. This is Agios, emissary of Greece, visiting your kingdom on a pilgrimage to the Holy Temple. I rose and bowed to Herod, my lord. Herod's lips turned up and his teeth flashed beneath them. An emissary sent to see the wonders I have brought to this land and report my service back to the empire. He clapped his hands. Tell me, Aegeus, has your stay been pleasant thus far? I glanced at Irenaeus, dining near the king, and saw the fear in his eyes. I am in awe. Everything is beyond description, and I have yet to even see the city in daylight. I only just arrived late last night. Where did you stay? The king asked me. Corinthus kindly took me in for the night, Majesty. The king flashed a glare at Corinthus. Did he? A man of your class should be lodged in one of our finest guest rooms. Do you not agree, Corinthus? I had to force myself not to smile at the look of shock on Irenaeus' face. Forgive me, Highness, Corinthus said. I was not sure which rooms were available. The king glanced at Irenaeus, whose shock expression quickly melted into a smile. Looking back at Corinthus, Herod said, You will show Lord Aegeus to one of the chambers overlooking the spring. Supply him with all he requires. The tales of your great kindness are not exaggerated, Majesty, I said, laying it on thick. Herod took a long draw from his golden cup and stood. The men around him stood as one. Stay as long as it pleases you, Aegeus. You are my guest in this palace and the city. I bowed again before he turned and left, followed by his train of nobles. Irenaeus glared at me over his shoulder, but he disappeared into the corridor and was gone. The apartment Corinthus selected for me was breathtaking. Huge double doors sailed open to reveal a veritable treasure trove. Almost all the furnishings were made of precious metals, making the room exceedingly bright in the daylight. It was also enormous, perhaps 50 feet in length and almost that in width. On the second floor of Corinthus's building, it opened to a spacious balcony with an incredible view of the fountain. The walls were built of that same white stone, except for the western wall, which was covered in fixed gold plates, to form a floor-to-ceiling mirror. The ceiling, which spanned 20 feet above the floor, was composed of alternating burnished tiles arranged in checkerboard fashion. Corinthus led me to the room past a large bed with silk pillows and a table gleaming in the sunlight, pointing out all I'd already noticed, but also 2 hidden closets for the wardrobe I was as yet without. It is a fabulous apartment, Lord Aegeus, one of the palace's finest. I am sure it will please you. He said. I assured him it was incredible and thanked him for such accommodation. Will you require any servants to accompany you into the city today? He asked. I can have them here at once. I looked out the window at the white robes working in the courtyard. An idea suddenly came to me. No, thank you. I have my own." He was obviously surprised. "I was not aware you had any servants with you. Were they not killed in the desert with the rest then?" I couldn't help to smile as he nearly caught me at my own game. "Many were slain, yes, but I did not mention that I sent two ahead of the train. They are out in the city right now visiting old friends. I did not want Irenaeus to know of them lest he hunt them down." Corinthus laughed and said, "Yes, well, Irenaeus can be bothersome. Stubborn as an ass sometimes, and twice as ornery. Very well then, I will prepare two servants' quarters." "Actually," I replied, "I believe one will be enough.